Hi, this is Denise Matthew, and welcome to another part of HT 101, How to Read Your Human Design Chart. I just wanted to let you know that if you wanted to slow down the speed of my voice, it's an easy thing to do. Just do it on the playback speed as I'm showing here, and it will be an experience tailor-made for you. Now, the throat center is considered probably one of the most important centers in human design. And this is also called a gearbox. It's the only gearbox in the human design system. Ultimately, the throat is considered to be the manifestation center, or where we need to get energy so we can bring all the things we've dreamed about, thought about, wished for into reality. And that means that when we have a motor attached to our throat, or a constant supply of energy from a motor, that potentially, based on human design theory, that we can actually manifest things a little faster in the world. But our manifestation is always going to be dependent upon our strategy, and if we're following our strategy, and it's also going to be dependent on timing, because some things are just not meant to manifest at our whim. They're meant to manifest when they're meant to manifest. So manifestation is not something that we can snap our fingers and say, yes, I have the energy, this is going to happen, and I will it to be. It doesn't actually happen like that. There is a timing thing. It is something that all the alignments need to sort of get in a row, and when they do, then big things can happen. And that's how manifestation happens. It's big things happen when things line up. But how do we prepare for those big things to line up? How do we prepare for those manifestations to happen in our lives? And we can be there waiting for it, and being able to recognize, okay, this is the correct time. So these are the kind of things of why we want to know about our human design system, why we want to know about our design, in that what our type is, what our strategy is, all those kind of things. What's our energy look like? Do we have energy to the throat? That's why we do this whole looking at our chart, because ultimately the magical prize at the end of the rainbow of knowing our design, there's a lot of other things, benefits, but most people are saying, I want to get when I want to get. So if we want to know how to manifest, knowing about our throat is probably the most important thing to be aware of. Of course, only second to our type and strategy and our authority. So let's talk about the throat center. But before we can talk about the throat center, just as its own entity, we want to talk about motors and what that means to have a motor to the throat, and how that is helping us to manifest. And if you want more information, I have 2 videos on a series that I started called The Voice of Creation. I've got part 1 and part 2, so I will put the links below if you want even more information than what I'm telling you about the throat center. So let's have a look at the throat center. So we have 4 motors in the human design system. They're the sacral, the will center, the root, and also the solar plexus. The most powerful motor in the human design system is the sacral center. And when you have a connection between the sacral center directly to the throat, and I mean, like, that would be what we call somebody who is a pure manifesting generator, and there's only one channel that actually does that, and that would be a very powerful manifestation channel. But having said that, we're always going to remember that if you have a sacral, if you have a defined sacral, you're always going to be a generator type, a manifesting generator or a generator type, which means you are not ever going to be a manifester, because a manifester always has an undefined sacral. So when you have these motors to your throat, and like I said, the pure manifesting generator, which would be the 3420, there's a lot of power in that energy. There's a tremendous amount of manifestation capability, but the manifestation capability can only come into being based on human design if that manifesting generator is actually following their strategy. And so that's why we always have to go back to the origins, go back to the basics, and say, okay, in order for me to manifest, to use this power to my advantage, I need to follow my strategy, and that would be your generator strategy, which is envision and wait for something to show up in your outside reality and then respond or not. And if you're a manifesting generator, you're going to inform and then respond or not. So these are the things we have to remember about a motor. When a motor is directly connected to the throat, there are only two actual types that actually have this configuration. One is a manifesting generator and the other is a manifester. But the manifester will never ever have the sacral connected to the throat, as I just said. So that's only 40% of the population. So what about the other 60% of the population? How do they manifest? And that's the biggest question that we all have. And yes, everyone can manifest things in their reality. Everyone can get energy to the throat, motor to the throat. But what we're talking about is when we have somebody who doesn't have a supply of energy to the throat, a constant supply of energy to the throat from a motor, they are people who need people. And that would be somebody who's a projector or a generator type. And reflectors have their own way of being, and that's because they're lunar beings and they also have their moon cycle. So when we're talking about generators or projectors getting energy to the throat or a motor to the throat, again, we're talking about people who need people. Now, how does this work? Let's talk about it. Now, generators and projectors might have motors defined in their chart or hanging gates that connect to a motor, but that doesn't mean that they have a direct connection. So that means that generator and projector types need help to get the energy to the throat or to get a direct channel from a motor to the throat. And that means that they need other people, and that's where electromagnetics come into play, as well as planetary transits. If we're talking about electromagnetics, we can imagine that two people have what's called hanging gates, or gates that don't make a complete channel. In this image, we see that somebody has a gate 12 and the other person has a gate 22. So they both have half of the channel 12-22. When the two come together, the energy is connected or it forms a channel, and that means that they have the channel between them 12-22, which brings the solar plexus to the throat and also takes a motor to the throat. Alternately, someone with a non-motorized throat can benefit from the energy of people with a motorized throat, even if there are no electromagnetics between them. Because what happens is the person with the motorized throat pretty much shares the energy with the person with the non-motorized throat, so that the person with the non-motorized throat can benefit from the interaction. And one more thing to keep in mind is that just because they're sharing the energy, or the motorized throat is sharing the energy, doesn't mean that anybody loses out on anything. In fact, it really is a win-win, because the person that has a non-motorized throat gets to have the motor to the throat, and the other person who has a motorized throat doesn't feel anything different in any way, shape, or form. And the other way to get a motor to the throat is through planetary transits. And if you want more information on how that works, you can check out my video where I talk all about planetary transits, and I'll leave the link below. So now we know what a motorized throat looks like, and we know that everybody can manifest and everybody does it in a way that is connected to the way they're designed. Now, when we're looking at a throat, we will look at, again, we're going back to the same concept of defined means that there's color. In this case, the throat is always going to be brown when it's defined. And of course, it's going to be white when it's undefined. Now, there is a little bit of a difference, and that's, again, going back to this whole motorized throat. So we end up having three types of throat configurations. So the first one is that I'm going to talk about is the one that is motorized. And as soon as the throat is motorized, that means there's going to be a connection from a motor to the throat. So that always means that it's going to be defined or brown. The second way that a throat can be defined is to be defined but not motorized. And that would be for somebody who is a projector type or somebody who is a generator type. So if we look at the images here, we can see that both of these people have defined throats, but they also have defined motorized throats. Now, the motor comes from the solar plexus, goes through, and the manifesting generator goes through the solar plexus, through the sacral, through the spleen, and then up to the throat. So that's sort of the path. Now, for the manifester, you can see that the will center goes to the identity center, and then it goes up to the throat. So they both have motorized throats, and that's what it looks like. Now, not all configurations are this sort of convoluted, but The most important thing is that they both have a motorized throat. When you have a motorized throat, you're always going to have a brown square because it's motorized and it's also defined. Now let's look at the defined throat and the undefined throat. So on the left-hand side, we see an undefined throat that's automatically going to be motorized, because as soon as the throat is undefined, it's always going to be unmotorized because there would be no connection from a motor to the throat. So there's no connection on the left-hand side with this generator with anything to define the throat. So that's an open throat. We'll talk about what that means in a minute, but I just wanted to show you what it looks like. The other side, we have a defined throat. Now, if you look at the defined throat, you'll see that there is no connection to a motor at all. There's no connection to the will center, the solar plexus, the root center, or the sacral center. So that their throat is defined, brown, but it is not motorized. Now, when somebody has a defined throat that is not motorized, it means that they have a fixed way of speaking. So when we're talking about a motorized throat, going back to the whole concept of a motorized throat, we're talking about somebody who can be heard easily. I did speak about this before, but I just want to repeat it in case you've skipped ahead and you haven't listened to other parts of the video. But a motorized throat means that if you're going into conversation with somebody, you can easily initiate a conversation. It means that you're heard in the way you want to be heard. There's a difference between a motorized throat and a non-motorized throat, or even a open throat. The difference is that somebody with a non-motorized throat or an undefined throat, because of the way the energy is configured, if somebody with a non-motorized throat or an open undefined throat starts a conversation, they may not actually be received in the way that they want to be. And what that means is that people may consider them butting in. People may consider them, just jumping into conversations and not really having anything important to say. They also might not be heard at all, because a non-motorized throat or an open undefined throat has sometimes that issue with not being heard, because there is a whole strategy in using an undefined or a non-motorized throat. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. So that's something to keep in mind, that when you have a non-motorized or an open throat, an invitation to speak your mind, say what you want to say, or pretty much anything related to conversation is always going to serve you better so that you can be heard the way you want to be heard. And that could be just as easy as somebody, nodding to you, or somebody saying hi. As soon as there's some level of initiation of the conversation of somebody else, then somebody with a non-motorized throat or an open throat has a much greater chance of being heard the way they want to be heard. Now let's get more into what it means to have a defined and an undefined throat. So when somebody has a defined throat, that means that they have their own supply of energy for that throat. It means that they speak a certain way, just like any other sender, because the energy is more fixed in a defined throat. A defined throat is always going to be somebody who's a manifester or a manifesting generator, so they are more fixed in the way they speak. And some generators and some projectors will have defined throats as well. It means that it's going to be brown. So it basically is all about this one way of speaking, and more of a fixed way of speaking. You have your own energy. You're not absorbing any energy like you would with an open center. Now, when we talk about an open center or an open throat, we can imagine that this is somebody who's going to be absorbing a lot of throat energy, or energy that is being transmitted from somebody with a fixed throat or a defined throat. So what that means is that somebody with an open throat is going to be absorbing the energy, and not only are they absorbing it, they're going to amplify it, as every center that's open does. What that means is that somebody with an open throat can have a lot of pressure, and this pressure can build up to the point where somebody just wants to explode or yell or make a really loud sound. And since there's only 1/8 of the population with an open, undefined throat, that means that they're kind of a rare breed. So there's a lot of energy to absorb from all the other people that have defined throats. So if we can imagine the undefined throat is somebody like a champagne bottle, and there's a cork on it, and they keep, the bubbles in the champagne bottle are just growing and growing and growing, and the pressure just keeps building. So there's, like I said, an explosive use of the throat. Other ways that somebody can express the throat energy when it builds up so much is they can butt into conversations. They can sort of do things that are unusual so that they'll get the attention, so that they can be spoken, or they can use their throat. They can dress funny. They can act funny. They could be the class clown. Or they could be the type of person that's always trying to speak over everybody else, who's always trying to get their voice heard. They could also be somebody who is always butting into conversations that nobody's invited them into. So there could be this potential for just wanting to talk and talk and talk and really not wait for somebody else to talk at all. They don't want to give up the stage when they're talking. They just want to continue to talk. And it makes a lot of sense, because if we can imagine that there's a lot of pressure that needs to be released. The secret to the open or undefined throat is to know that the state of the throat that is most inviting to everybody else, so that they'll ask you to talk or they'll be magnetized toward you, is a state of silence. So when somebody with an open or undefined throat is silent, or they're quiet, or they're sitting at a party and they're observing everybody else, but they're not really talking, what happens is people come over to this person and they want the person to talk, because that is like an invitation that they're sending out by their silence. And what happens is that is the way the throat works best, because then suddenly you can talk about the things you want to talk about, because you've been initiated or invited into conversations. And this can be one of the most difficult parts of having an open, undefined throat, because of this whole pressure thing, and you want to release the pressure. So understanding that silence is the way to deal with this ability to use your voice, and use your voice in a way that people are going to hear you the way you want to be heard. And again, it's going back to the whole concept of silence. Although it might not feel like it, there's a lot of positive things that can happen because you have an open or undefined throat. And that's because you have this ability to have a fluidity in how you express yourself via the throat. This fluidity comes in the form of being able to speak to a wide range of people. So in other words, you have an ability to have do a speech, for instance, and you're speaking to a group of people and they connect with you because what you're saying can speak to their ears. It's almost like there's a connection between your throat that you can connect with the people so that they can actually get into what you have to say. There's an ability to modulate the voice, to have a beautiful singing voice, and not everybody's going to be a wonderful singer when they have an open or undefined throat, but there's a way that they can use their throat energy in a way that somebody with a defined throat just can't. So they can do impressions of people, they can do sounds that most people can't do. So there's a lot of benefit to be had with having an open throat, but the whole concept is, unless you're being invited into a conversation, you're going to feel unseen. But when you start to understand that when you're quiet, you become like an inviting force for people to want to know what you have to say, then that's when you can actually use your throat, talk about what you want to talk about. And it is more rewarding because you're not being shut down. You're not being told you talk too loud. You're not being told, we don't want to hear your opinion. You're not being shoved out of conversations. You're not in any way being stifled, because suddenly when you're being invited into a conversation or you're being initiated into a conversation, then what happens is you are actually starting to express yourself in a way that people are possibly hanging on every word you say. So knowing how your throat works is really important, because as well as the concept that you could be shut down quite a few times, there's this other concept of when you're explosively using your voice, you can cause your vocal cords to have issues. You can cause issues with thyroid and those types of things. So it's important to know how your throat works and just experiment with the concept of being silent and see if it actually does work. And that, if people are asking for your opinion or waiting for you to give your opinion, does it work better? Are people more into what you have to say based on you sort of stepping back and waiting to be acknowledged? And just experiment with it and see what shows up. And the theory of human design is that whatever is attached to the throat is what we talk about. In other words, the definition or the defined gates of the throat. So if we have centers that are connected to the throat, then usually we'll talk about the centers. So in other words, if we have our ajna connected to the throat, say we have the channel 4323, what that talks about is the idea that we like to speak our mind. So that's the whole story about what the throat wants to talk about. So if you have the gate 16 defined, then you might have the voice of enthusiasm. You can be very enthusiastic about things when you speak about them. When you have the gate 62 defined, you could talk about the practicality of things, that everything's got to have a purpose and a reason. The practicality comes after there's a hypothesis. So if you think about the gate 17 as a hypothesis and the gate 62, they're connected, it's a full channel, then you're talking about the practicality, saying, okay, you have this concept, this idea, how can we make it real? How can we bring it into manifestation? Because we always have to remember that the throat center is a center for manifestation. This is where we want to be speaking the things that are important to us. So the other thing is we have the gate 23. The gate 23 is called breaking apart, but it really is about this concept of taking out the unnecessary things. So if we talked about the gate 43 before, we're talking about these big, innovative, new ideas. The gate 23 says, okay, you have this idea. How can we bring it into being? And what do we need to keep and what do we need to throw away so that we can make this streamlined in the way that it can actually manifest in the real world? The gate 56 is connected to the gate 11. So the gate 11 is the ideas. The gate 56 is saying, okay, you have these ideas. What can we do with these ideas? How can we bring these ideas into the real world? How can we tell the story of these ideas? The gate 12 is connected to the throat as well. The gate 12 is the shy part of the gate of the 1222 channel. So we have the grace and we have the shy or boldness. The gate 12 can be shy or bold. It can be, some people say that there's some level of being able to connect with angels, and they also say that there can be some level of prophecy with the gate 12 as well. So being able to speak things that might happen in the future, or some level of intuition about the future. We also have the gate 20, which is all about charisma, and this is all about like a charismatic use of your voice. So when you speak, people are interested in what you have to say, and it's really a kind of like, wow, that person just really knows how to talk to you, and they just come with this real sense of charisma. Gate 31 is all about influence. This is a leadership energy. This is a democratic leadership. The gate 8 is connected to the gate 1, and this is all about a creative contribution. Speaking about this individual creative contribution, and this is something that you want to sort of put out there for a group, and although it is individual, there is some emphasis on wanting it to help people as well. The gate 33 is a story weaver, and what it comes down to is it's connected to the gate 13, and the gate 13 is about being a listener, hearing the stories of people, and then the gate 33 sort of keeps these stories. There's a historical perspective in this whole channel as well as the gate 33, where you like to document or record history. And the gate 45 is the gate of the king or queen. And this is connected to the gate 21. And it's all about this idea of having this regal leadership. Now, this is a leadership energy that is actually given to you because of your energy. And it is related to abundance because it is connected to the will center when it is connected to the gate 21. This is related to resources, bringing the resources into the tribe because it is a tribal energy. And the gate 35 is all about experience. It is part of the experiential wave 35-36. And what that means is that people who have this energy, either the 35 or the 36 or the whole channel, it's all about experiencing things, testing things, and they use the tests and the things that they experience to sort of move forward in life. The gate 35 is the side of the channel that is more about taking their time with what they want to pick to learn. So if you have the gate 36, you always want to jump into something new because it seems exciting and you might be bored. Now, when you have the gate 35, it's like you're more reticent about what you're going to try out. So you've been there, you've done that, you've tried things, and you're more careful about what you're choosing. So there's a lot of careful picking on what you want to do and what you want to experience. It is called the gate of the Jack or Jill of all trades. So that's the whole point of it, is to be really good at things. And usually this kind of thing that you're good at, it just comes naturally to you. There is no level of mastery. This is more of an experience rather than mastery. Mastery would be on the other side. That's when the 1648 kind of energy. But having said that, it is all about the experience.